Hello, Carol.
Hi, Carlos. How are you doing?
I'm fine, and you?
I'm doing fantastic here.
Okay, thank you for being here in PyCon Colombia 2019.
It was my pleasure. It's been so amazing to see what everybody's doing with Python and Jupyter and just the culture as well.
How did you hear about PyCon Colombia?
Well, actually two places. One was from Fernando Perez, who was the founder of IPython, who grew up in Colombia. And so I've heard lots of stories about it, and unfortunately he hasn't been able to make it here yet, but I'm going to nag him until he does. And then the other was from Lorena Mesa and Naomi Cedar, who were here last year.
Yeah.
And for an entire year I heard, this was the best conference ever. It was so much fun. It was so organized. And in fact, that was the truth, both last year and this year. So you guys are doing a great job down here.
So, what did you think about PyCon Colombia? What was your experience here?
You know, my experience was twofold. One was I was very pleasantly surprised by the level of technology that was in the talks. So the technical talks were quite good, and particularly in the data sciences and AI and machine learning. So it was really fun to watch the talks and see different things than I have seen before. So that was really nice. And I got to play with a Kiwi, the robot. That was also really fun. But I think what also stood out was from the moment I stepped through the door in the airport, there was this huge cheering group of organizers greeting us, and it was both very humbling and very warm and welcoming, and everybody that I have met since has been really great. And I think that's what makes a really good Python community, is when the people like each other, they like being with each other, because much of what we learn in Python, or even with Jupyter, is what we share with each other. And I think you have cultivated a community that does that, and it shows, and I couldn't have had a better time.
Oh, really great. That sounds great. So that is the idea, try to the people feel comfortable and share more than a technical skills. Yes, that the people fall in love
Right.
with Python and community and make friends and make partners. And
Yeah, and it's great to see, like, Carolina did her first talk at a PyCon, and, you know, the day before she was very nervous, and we talked about, you know, how well she knows the material, and she's among friends. And when I actually went and watched her talk, she gave a great talk about Selenium and testing, and she was poised, she was confident, and, you know, for a first-time speaker, that's a hard thing to do. So you guys are doing something right with your speakers, and encouraging diversity within the speaker population as well.
yeah, well, even not the first time. You could make a lot of talks and you feel nervous and
Yeah, well, you know, I still feel nervous before some talks more than others. This one, I was a little less nervous, but I think that was because everybody had been so warm.
yeah,
But then sometimes that makes you more nervous because you want to do a really good job.
yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I don't know that it ever completely goes away, but it gets easier. So
Cool. So you have been president on the Python Software Foundation, right?
I've been a director
Okay.
on the board of directors of the Python Software Foundation for 2 years. And Naomi and I, when Naomi started, we were both on the board. And then I felt from my what I've done with nonprofits and governance, it's good to have changing of people on the board to bring in new, fresh ideas. And so it was great to be able to hand it over to Lorena and Jackie, and Naomi was there still for continuity. So it was a really fabulous experience.
Yeah, learning is the funny part of
Yes.
Oh,
And she's also extremely intelligent. So, yeah, but she definitely adds spark to a room.
okay. So for the people out there that don't know, what is the Python Software Foundation?
The Python Software Foundation has two main purposes in its mission. One is sort of the legal purpose. It holds the intellectual property rights of the language. But the more important part of it is, the second part of the mission is to bring Python to as many groups and communities across the world as possible. And that is really where the bulk of the efforts go into, helping new conferences get started, by, providing grants so that the financial outlay is less for the first time, sponsoring meetup fees. A lot of money comes in from sponsors, and that then gets used for both scholarships and grants. And then also they manage the infrastructure of like PyPI and the guts of the equipment that Python runs on. So, and then Guido is actually the president of the Python Software Foundation, and he's definitely involved, but it's usually a quiet involvement, and he's actually, I think, a big reason why the community is as warm and welcoming as it is.
Yeah, so Python Software Foundation always support, for example, PyCon Colombia.
Yeah.
Last year with Lorena and Naomi and Manuel Kaufman from Argentina.
Right.
Well, an amazing support, amazing ideas to make great conference.
Well, and Nick Coughlin, when we were on the board together, he really drove the grants for Manuel to do the outreach throughout South America. And I think based on being in Argentina a few months ago and being here, it was well worth the amount of, it was not a significant, sizable grant in the grand scheme of things, but it was well-targeted grants that actually had really good results, which we can't ask for anything better than that. And then Ava, who is the director of the entire foundation, and has also organized PyCons for as long as I can remember. She does a great job building a team of employees that really has multiplied the impact over the last few years of what the foundation is able to do.
So, what is your posture about current state of girls in community and technology?
My current thoughts. I have a lot of them, but we won't go into all of them. In general, I take the view that if people love doing something and they want to do something, there shouldn't be barriers for them to do it. And that doesn't really matter about gender or race. And I think that's the teacher in me that loves education and really wants to see somebody who's new to something succeed and feel empowered by everything. When it comes to women, what's hard is sometimes walking into a room and being the only woman in the room. And 99% of the people you're going to run across are delightful human beings, and then that 1% feels the need to either put somebody down, and oftentimes that makes it harder as a woman because you don't know, are they doing this to everyone or are they doing it to me because of my gender? And one of the things that's really important is, much like the effort that Jessica McKellar started when she encouraged me to submit a talk and a proposal to PyCon, having that support of people that help teach the next generation of people is really important. So after Carolina finished her talk, I asked her, would you please help other women in the community feel comfortable giving a talk? And I think that's the best you can do. And then the little pet peeve I have is, oftentimes I will get referred to as a woman engineer or a woman coder, whatever. And at the end of the day, I'm an engineer, I'm a coder, I'm a woman second. And, I want to be valued for the talent that I have and what I bring to a project versus my gender. And I think a lot of women, I won't speak for every them because I can't, but I think a lot of people feel that way.
Okay, but have you seen any progress on the last years, or?
I've seen a lot of progress in the Python community in the last 5 years. And some of it was getting more speakers at PyCon North America. And, that was a gradual process. But, once we hit over 30%, that was phenomenal, given how competitive it is to get a talk accepted into PyCon, because I've sat on the talk committee for 5-6 years now, and the quality of the submissions is so high that you could probably take 80% of the talks and they would be PyCon stage worthy. And then I think just in general, the fact that there's now 4 women that are part of the core development team for the language has been huge. Guido has been supportive from day one, as long as I've known. But, the culture had to shift a little in order to accept women. So Marietta was the first one, and then myself, and then Lisa and Emily. And I anticipate that there will be more women in the future as well. We have a lot of people working and triaging issues, and I think it's inevitable that they'll be promoted as core developers at some point.
So you have a bachelor in electrical engineering, right?
That's correct.
Okay, and a master in management.
That is also correct.
Okay, and then you moved to computer science field. Why did this happen?
Well, actually, it happened when I was in 5th grade, and I lived near Bell Labs, and they had a program that would take some kids that were good in math and help them learn how to program on a mainframe. Okay. So I started programming on that, and I've seen like 4 big generations of computing over my lifetime. And the first was when I got the chance to work on a TRS-80 and then one of the first Apple computers. Okay. And I got to work on that in 7th grade, and it was really cool. So what did I make? I ported like an Atari game to that Apple computer, but it was so much fun. It took me probably 3 months, but it was really fun. And for me, it was like a puzzle and problem solving. And, at the time when I was applying to university, computer science was not a well-known major. In fact, at Duke, it wasn't even in the engineering school, it was in liberal arts. And it wasn't even a bachelor's of science, it was a bachelor of arts. So, I figured, okay, I'm good in math, I like science, I like building things, let me do electrical engineering, which was a great place to be. And the school was fairly small, it was probably 200 students per year. So my roommates were art history majors and political science majors, and I ran Duke's television station. So we had a campus-wide student-run television station. So it was about 120 people, and I was the chair of that. So while I was in school, I both got the technical training as well as management training that I never expected that I would get. And when I was debating, do I go get a PhD in electrical engineering, which seemed like the natural progression, I didn't feel all that excited. In fact, I started having panic attacks because I was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to be the only woman in this electrical engineering PhD program, and it's going to be the next 5 years of my life. And fortunately, a wonderful woman recruited me to go to MIT's management school. And basically she shared with me, I could bridge my love of technology, what it can do for people, and how to manage those things. And from that point on, my passion was, how do we use technology to make people better? And in particular, how do we get it to improve education for all and make access to education easier.
Okay, all the quality of life.
So I've always been like the computer geek for as long as I could remember. And for me, it's the puzzle. But I don't have formal training in computer science.
Yeah.
But I've read a lot, so.
Yeah, of course. You have a really great history and achievements along your life.
Thank you.
Really, really amazing. I have to say, generated the money of your plane as tickets scholarship for some of the attendants.
Yeah.
We are very thankful for that. That is really amazing.
Thank you for humbling me even more. It's something, I didn't have a lot of money when I went through graduate school. And one of the things that MIT, at least at that time, really stressed was giving back to others. And, for me, I'm fortunately in a privileged position that I can do that. Not everybody can, but I want to give as many people the opportunity and not have to, sacrifice financially in order to do it. And I think it's important because they could be amazing developers, but just not have the money to come. And so it was my pleasure to do that.
Okay, that's nice. So some attendants has the scholarship and
Nice.
she was, and actually they are really, really, really happy in the conference.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. And I'm not surprised they're really happy in the conference because it's been a very warm and welcoming conference and, a good balance of fun and community and technology as well.
Okay. What is Geeks in Residence?
Geek in Residence. Well, sadly, the Fab Lab in San Diego does not exist anymore. But at Geek in Residence, Fab Lab San Diego was a nonprofit community makerspace. It started in the center of Bits and Atoms at MIT, and now there's Fab Labs around the world. San Diego was one of the first ones. But like many things, it takes money to run a nonprofit, and so there came a point where it made sense in the last year to kind of wind it down. But a Geek in Residence is somebody who volunteers their time to teach classes, to help people on the weekends get started. So I did a lot of teaching of wearable electronics, a little bit of software, but the software to control the electronics. And what was great is, many of these things were free on the weekends, so people could come in from all different walks of life, whether it was a woodworker, somebody who restores cars. And we were in an area of San Diego that was accessible by transit. And so people could come from all walks of life. And it was downtown, and, on one side of our building, we had a gym, like a weight gym. On the other side, we had people restoring cars, and very creative, fun cars. And then upstairs, we had a roller derby. So you could hear, people skating. But it was fun. But it was another way just to blend my love of open hardware as well as software. My role over there was really to help organize classes in wearable electronics, to work at special events. Like we would have some couple times a year community events that would use open data for changing civic things in the city in San Diego. And one year they actually had something that was kind of interesting. They had people make benches from different material that would get put out around the city. We helped people build the benches and design the benches. And then, when there's big festivals at the parks in San Diego, we made cupcake cars. So big cupcakes, and and then people could ride inside them and drive it around in the little park, and the kids loved it. And they were all handmade, and they weren't all the same. So it was really fun. But it's stuff like that. It's teaching people how to build things.
Yeah, nice. So what do you prefer, software or hardware?
I love them both. I slightly give the edge to software. And partially because so much of hardware is driven by software now, that the fun things, the blinky lights and all of that, like on the party bus the other night,
Yeah.
I was listening to the music and I was having fun, but I was also looking at the rows of NeoPixels that were all around the top of the bus. And I'm like, oh, I know that one. And look, it's changing colors. And I could see the patterns that had been programmed in it. So I give the slight edge to software, but I think there's some really fascinating things that when you combine it with open hardware, you get some really cool stuff.
The Colombian party bus.
Yep, the Colombian party bus with, it could have Circuit Python in it next year. Who knows? That would be fun, actually.
Very fun, but that is rare. A funny bus and you are thinking in patterns.
Well, that's who I am. The open hardware stuff is really important to me, and helping foster Circuit Python has been very helpful, because to me, I view it as a vehicle to get younger folks interested, or folks that perhaps don't see themselves as computer software engineers, but if they knew some computers, they could be better. Like MIT at one point, they made a 3D printer that would decorate cakes with icing or chocolate or sugar. Mm-hmm. And, somebody who's a baker or loves baking would want to use something like that. But if they don't know how to program the software, at least on a basic level, they won't be able to. So, it's empowering people to be able to do what they want to do.
Yeah, of course. So you have your own company, while in consulting.
Yes.
What was your motivation to create it?
My motivation to create it was so that I could do the things that I love here and have more flexibility. Mm-hmm. So I will do, training and small term consulting things. But I needed flexibility. Before I worked on the Jupyter project, I actually had my own company because my mother had Alzheimer's but lived on the other side of the country. Okay. So I had to fly back and forth to make sure my family was okay. And it was easier to do that when you're your own boss than if you're having to ask permission.
Yeah.
And, so I have a lovely little office, and I can, really study something very deeply for a week if I want to, or I can come to PyCon Colombia and not stress out about being here and, really enjoy the experience. So it's what works for me right now in this part of my life. And I want to write more curriculum around how to use Jupyter notebooks and Jupyter tools in general for people that are like age 13 to 18, sort of like what I talked about in my keynote.
Yeah, just okay.
Yeah. How do you take this technical stuff and make it understandable yet realistic for people like 13 and 18 to 18-year-olds? They know how to use iPhones and phones and, gadgets, but they might not know how they're made or what goes on inside, or, they might learn some HTML and be able to get up an HTML page, but they don't know the whole thing. So I like taking things apart as much as I like building them. So sometimes with students, if you take it apart and you gradually show them what goes into it, they feel empowered that they can then do it. So those are probably my favorite projects. As well, I think the Jupyter notebooks have really revolutionized science, data science, teaching, and, Jupyter Hub and Binder in particular. The ability to spread that to even more people and be a multiplier is huge. And so that's important. And then Python as well, because it's such a readable, fun language that I think of all the computer languages I've ever learned, it was the easiest one to get started with as a beginner.
Yeah, Jupyter Notebook is used around the world in a lot of classrooms.
Right.
really very impact on
Yeah.
the life of all education.
Yeah.
So, how did you start working in Project Jupyter?
Well, I started using IPython notebooks when I think Jessica and I were working on the nonprofit Open Hatch. And so I was working on this Django code base, and I was gradually learning Python. And when I learn a new computer language or a programming language, I typically like to make some music projects because that's my interest. So I want to make it something fun so that I'll actually do it. And I came across this music theory library called Music 21 and started playing around with that. And I was playing around with it a lot of times on the weekends as people would come in and out of the Fab Lab. Okay. And they would see it and they're like, "What are you doing?" And I'm like, "Oh, I'm doing computer programming." They're like, "That's not like any programming that I've seen." And people naturally, music is pretty universal, so people naturally felt more comfortable with it. Mm-hmm. And so I started seeing how people responded to the notebooks. And then, women who were maybe in their mid-30s who felt like they could never program, but they had run things like events and maybe a conference or something that has lots of moving pieces, and you've got to put it together and you have to organize it. And basically I wrote a small tutorial of how similar writing a program is to running an event. Okay. You have setup,
yeah,
and preparation, and then you have execution, which is when you're doing the event or when your program is running.
Yeah.
And then typically you have some cleanup, so you're cleaning up if you're bringing down a server or something, and, cleaning up after an event. And that really resonated with people. They could understand. And I said, don't look at it as this whole page of text and jargon. Mm-hmm. Look at it in little chunks.
Yeah.
And it's far more accessible that way. So
similar to a partiture.
Yeah. And, it's been pretty cool. Some of those people have actually gone on and taken Django Girls and things like that.
Mm-hmm. In your opinion, what has been the contribution to the Project Jupyter that you consider the most relevant or that you makes proud?
Oh, well, I guess I didn't finish answering your other question because it was actually the kindness of Fernando Perez.
Okay.
And Brian Granger as well, that I met them at a SciPy. Mm-hmm. And I was one of few women there, and Lorena Barba was giving this keynote in education, and I was very excited because at that point I had realized the potential of the notebooks being this huge game changer in education. I didn't have any view into data science and science, but Fernando was so gracious, and he's like, "Well, what do you think? What do you think about that?" And, kept up contact with them, and at some point when they won the big grant for Jupyter, they asked me if I would join the team. And it was a cool enough project that I was willing to put my stuff on hold and do it, and I don't regret it. And I think the single biggest impact it has had is it has made, in some ways, computer programming into actual storytelling. Because the notebooks, you can use prose like the markdown cells, you can execute code, you can have video, audio, very rich visualizations. And I think that became very powerful, especially when you combine it with the amazing libraries on so many different subjects in Python. And I think the team really was committed to people using the tools and the tools being open. And I think the notebook itself was probably the game changer. And then things like Jupyter Hub and Binder and later Jupyter Lab just continued to expand the number of people that it reached. And the community was great because they did the bulk of teaching everybody how to use it.
Yeah.
So, but it's been incredibly rewarding.
Okay. which ones did you consider your more important achievements in life?
My most important achievements are my children. Beyond my family, I think it was the combination of the impact that Python and Jupyter had on education. And, you always hope that when you join a project, you'll do something good. And, we had such a phenomenal team and such a great community around us that it was really humbling to get the ACM award, where people before us were like the people that made the web or Unix or Java language. So it was really humbling to see, hey, when we look back 5 years from now, we really made stuff that had an impact on people. And it was recognized as having an impact on people. And I hope more people keep using it.
What do you think is the new scheme and organization about Python Council?
The Python Steering Council?
Yeah.
I'm really excited for it. I think it will be a change, and people always take a little time to adapt to change, but I think it's going to be really good. I'm hoping that the core developers, by and large, are all volunteers, and it's a lot of work and stress to create a language that so many people depend on, as well as living your own life. And I think sometimes people forget that on the other side of the complaint or the issue, that there's actually a person with a life and feelings and whatnot. So I think the steering council will help balance the load for any one individual. Like if Guido has a lot going on, then Brett or I could step in and more share the load. And I also think it will help improve the processes around Python and how we develop Python. So the tooling, the testing, the infrastructure that we need as a core team to make Python stable and effective, and instead of fighting the tools, be more efficient, which then will give the core developers more time to do what they love, which is developing.
So how did you receive the news for your new role inside this council?
I saw a tweet from Christian in Germany, and I was absolutely stunned. And then I looked in my email, and there was actually an email that said it. But I mean, there were, I think, 15 people, all really talented people running for the steering council. And, I took a little convincing, because at first I wasn't going to run, but enough people asked me if I would that I considered that. And I said, one thing that I do know how to do from the experience I had on the Python Software Foundation is how do you put together a governance that will empower other people. And, if I can do that in the inaugural steering council, I'm happy to do it. And, we can only see where it goes from here.
Congrats for that.
Thank
That's
you.
a great news for us too.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Did you have anything left to say to the Colombian Python community?
Enjoy Python. Enjoy future PyCon Colombias. Keep working together like you already are. Keep building on the great foundation that you have in machine learning and deep learning and AI, because I think it brings in more ideas and more enterprise and businesses as well. And I think keep encouraging women so that you have a diverse community, because it brings in more ideas. And I think you guys are doing all the right things already. Just keep doing more of it.
Okay, thank you so much, and enjoy the rest of the conference.
I will absolutely do that. It has been my pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey!